So 9 days ago marked my 1-year anniversary of an admittedly emotional goodbye to a team of people I loved at Daxco. After exactly 15 and a half years of leading a company from a tiny startup to a 350-person team with 10,000 customers around the world, it came to an end. In the world of strange, ironic coincidences, this is actually the very same room where my team, both past and present, threw me my going away party a year ago. For most, both inside and outside the company, it seemed like a rather abrupt end. But for me, the end was a process over a relatively considerable period of time. In fact, as I've reflected back over the last year and 9 days, I sometimes think I should have brought the end to an end a year or so earlier. But that's not always an easy thing to do. As Angela Duckworth says in her book, grit is about working on something you care about so much that you're willing to stay loyal to it. And then she goes further to say the two primary components of grit are passion and perseverance. Therefore, if you're gritty and you have that willingness to stay loyal and you have a high dose of passion and perseverance for what you're doing, it can be difficult to call it quits. And that was certainly true for me. Regardless, I have total faith that it played out exactly the way it was supposed to. When the end does come, even when things you're not sure you want to come to an end, if you maintain an open mind and optimism, it quite frequently brings about unexpected positives and meaningful opportunities. People keep looking at the screen, so now I'm making sure. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Trust me, it'll be black sometimes. You just have faith. Okay. But it quite frequently brings about unexpected positives and meaningful opportunities. In fact, I like the way Creative Mornings put it in their announcement of this month's theme when they said, the secret about the end is that it actually contains countless possibilities. I couldn't agree more. Among other things, ends can reinvigorate, they can act as reminders, and they can open the door to new things via a restart. Regarding the opportunity to reinvigorate, and speaking of ends, I have 18-year-old twins that just graduated from high school, and I've now embarrassed them because they're in this room. And in 21 days, not that I'm counting or dreading this moment, but in 21 days, we're going to get in our cars and drive west to drop them off at college, which will mark an end of their time here in Birmingham, hopefully only temporarily. Fortunately, the timing of my end to a relatively complex, stressful, and heavy travel CEO role afforded me a ton more time with both of them during their final year, not to mention their younger brother and my wife as well. And that was an unexpected, awesome gift, and it certainly helped me get reinvigorated for what's next. My end also acted as a good reminder. This may seem a bit strange, but in my last gig, I became known as Daxco Dave. It just wasn't a Twitter handle. It literally is what lots of people I knew called me. It's what customers called me. It's what most of my team probably called me. It's even what my teenage kids' friends called me. They would come over and say, hey, Daxco Dave. And so it became part of who I was. Stepping away reminded me, though, that it's not healthy for your identity to be completely tied up in your company or in work alone. And as important as it is, there is more to life than just your career. As one of my favorite authors, Tim Keller, says, you will not have a meaningful life without work, but you cannot say that work is the meaning of your life. And so to me, that's a pretty important reminder to not forget. And finally, an end to one thing brings a beginning to a new thing, a restart. In fact, I would argue there are two ends to a spectrum or to a timeline. The one that comes immediately to mind as we hear the word end is the ending end, as in the completion of something. But there's the beginning end too. It's the start of that timeline, the start of that spectrum. So one ending allows space for a beginning end, and this is oftentimes where promise and opportunity and excitement lives. So I didn't let my temporary retirement last very long. I almost immediately started thinking about what's next and what my new beginning end would be. And I've been in Birmingham for 17 years, and I proudly consider this home. And I've also spent my entire career in software. And since 1997, it's always been in startup and entrepreneurial situations. So with taking that into account, I wanted to leverage both my love for Birmingham and what I feel like I'm gifted in, experienced in, and passionate about. So 2 primary areas of focus came to the top when I started thinking through that. The first became known as BISO, which is a concept and a company I launched just a few months ago. And I'm not going to get into what we do or what we're all about, other than to say a big motivation behind what I was doing was to create high-quality jobs here in Birmingham and to grow those over the long term. And by long term, I'm not talking about 5 or 10 years. I'm talking 10, 15, 20, and beyond. Secondly, around the same time I was launching BISO, I also started my 2-year term as the chairman of the Community Foundation of Greater Birmingham. And for those of you not familiar with the Community Foundation, I know some of you are, because some of you work there, it is the philanthropic organization that maybe is best known in Birmingham for being the people behind the 3 Parks Project, which resulted in the creation of Railroad Park, Red Mountain Park, and Ruffner. So now, and they do lots of other stuff, which I'll talk about in a second. But now my full-time work and my primary volunteer activity are in tight alignment. That is, over the coming years, I'm going to be spending all of my waking hours, or most of my waking hours, and my time to do my small part in helping Birmingham become better. So speaking of a better Birmingham, stand up if you've lived here in the metro area for 5 years or more, including if you went to high school and then left for college and came back. Okay, so wow, that's a lot. Okay, so look around, that's almost everybody. Okay, now for those of you standing, raise your hand if you think Birmingham is dramatically better than it was 5 or 10 years ago. Okay, great. You can all sit down now. That's actually the way I've felt as well. Here's a chart showing the 100 largest metro areas and their job growth. So just to kind of explain it, we're not going to go in super in depth, and I just want to make sure. Okay. Everything to the far left are the cities that are growing jobs at the fastest pace over the last 10 years. This is a 10-year chart. It's actually 2007 through 2017, which is the latest data. Those on the far right, as you can see, actually dip below the dark line, and those are cities or metro areas that are actually losing jobs over a 10-year period. Does that make sense? So left good, right not good. Okay, so I mentioned I feel the same way. You know, if I had to guess based on the way it feels living here, I'd put us right about here somewhere. I would say, you know, it's not the best, but it's pretty good, and it feels like things are headed in the right direction. But what if I told you this is actually where we are? If over the last 10 years, that was our job growth, that's not good news. In fact, according to research from the Brookings Institution, that puts us number 93 out of the 100 largest metro areas in the country. So that's not just bad news, that's terrible news. That means that we have had less people working in the metro area on an absolute number, not percentages, not growth rate. We have less people working in the Birmingham metro area today than we did in 2007. And according to some people I was talking to recently, there's a study that says we're actually the only major southeastern city that has not gotten back to pre-recession job rates yet, job levels. And so that's not good. So think about that. Less people working here than we had 10 years ago. Okay, now stay with me here because this ain't going to be pretty. I'm going to go through some stats relatively quickly just to make a point. We're also number 72 in prosperity, as measured by a percentage of change in the standard of living for the residents in the metro area. We're number 97 in inclusion, which this is not racial inclusion, which I'll get to in a second. This is measured on how many people are actually participating in the workforce. So we're number 97 over the last 10 years. This is related to the change in employment rate. In other words, the percentage of people actually working in our region as a percentage. Okay, so you may dismiss this as a biased report or, you know, lowly little Brookings up in DC doesn't know what they're talking about and doesn't have their data right. But unfortunately, there's other studies that say the same thing. According to the Together We Prosper report that was written by Park in 2017, between 2000 and 2016, so a 17-year period, our entire job growth for the first 17 years of our century was 0.24%. We have 1 in 4 workers in the Birmingham metro area that are at high risk of losing their jobs to automation. That's people like drivers and people in the retail space. We also have kind of a fundamental structural issue. We are one of the most fragmented metro areas with 35 separately governed municipalities. That's just in Jefferson County, not the full 7-county area, but just Jefferson County, 35. There's other people who are in this bad shape too on the fragmentation. But fragmentation is a real issue, and I'm going to mention in a few minutes some things that are happening around that, but that's an issue. And then there's diminished stature. Today, and we risk more diminished stature in the future. In 1950, Birmingham, and now I'm talking about just the city limits of Birmingham, not the full metro area. The city of Birmingham was the 34th largest city in the country. Today, we're not even in the top 100 for the city center. We've lost a ton of residents in Birmingham City. A lot of those people have obviously moved to the suburbs, but we went from 34 to not even in the top 100. That's on a national level. But also on a more local level, if things don't change, there's lots of people now, and the data is backing this up, that are predicting Huntsville could actually surpass us as the largest city in the state. There's a report that says Madison County is expected to grow 35% from where they are today to 2040. Jefferson County is predicted to grow 1.4%, 35 versus 1.4%. So, what would that do to our collective psyche if we were no longer the largest city? It seems like kind of a vanity metric, but it is important. We're in need of traded industries. Traded industries are those companies that produce goods or services that are made here but are sold elsewhere. And those are important because they bring new dollars into your economy instead of just churning the same dollars. So if you think about this, some local companies that will come to mind: Shipt, Daxco, Encompass Health, which used to be Health South, EBSCO, companies like that are producing things here and then selling them elsewhere, versus restaurants and retail and services companies. So we're in need of traded industries. And as you can see, we are way behind the average nationally, as well as some of our larger neighbors. Those jobs that we need to create in these traded industries are around things like advanced manufacturing, so robotics, healthcare devices, aerospace, life sciences and biotech is the second category, and then the third would be IT or software. So we have a very low percentage, as I mentioned. We need to improve that. High-skilled workers, we have a very low concentration of high-skilled workers, which fits directly back into the 1 in 4 at risk of being automated. So in this case, think about engineers. Again, we're well behind the national average, which is in the 30s. We're only at 21.4%. And then we're still failing from a racial inclusion in our economy, as reflected by the fact that black residents in the full metro area, not just the city of Birmingham, but Birmingham Metro, the unemployment rate is twice that of white residents across the entire metro area. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. I think you get the picture, hopefully, that there's some data and facts behind the real situation. The seriousness of this kind of situation became evident to me through a series of experts and speakers that a group of people, the city of Birmingham, the Community Foundation, and others started bringing to Birmingham to really start shining a light on this, as well as some of the research and studies that laid out the facts. And it really opened my eyes to a different reality. When I asked you guys to stand and raise your hand, I said I felt the same way. But I couldn't help but think that, myself included, a lot of us are just oblivious to this. We're hanging out in cool breweries like this. We're networking with other high-flying professionals, and things are going really well. We're eating awesome food from Kale Me Crazy, and everything seems fine. I just feel like we're a little bit oblivious. And I know that was my situation to a large degree. In fact, when Amy Liu, who is one of the senior folks at the Brookings Institute, came and spoke, and some of you guys, did anybody go to her BBJ luncheon? So a few of you guys did. It was great. You should have been there. It's actually online. You can listen to it. I believe it's posted online. But you can listen to her, and Josh Carpenter from the city spoke on a panel about these very things. She spoke to the Community Foundation board of directors right before that, and she's running us through this. I was literally, like my stomach was turning. I couldn't believe she was telling us this because everything felt so great. So I was a bit shocked, and I literally, when she opened the floor and she went into a lot more detail than I just did, when she opened the floor for questions, and I'm looking around the table, and fortunately at the Community Foundation, we have a lot of really successful people who have grown some of the businesses you are all very familiar with in Birmingham. And I looked around the room and said, I don't think any of us are feeling this pain. And so I told her I was shocked. I said, okay, you guys have worked with Detroit. Detroit's doing some really innovative things. I asked her, what did cities like Detroit and others that you're working with that are kind of post-industrial cities like ours do? What triggered them to actually start taking action? And she said they recognized that they were in a crisis. And then she looked at each of us and she said, you guys are in a crisis. I just don't think you know it yet. And so that was a pretty startling thing for her to say. So I take no pleasure in sharing this today. I actually feel like I'm a pretty optimistic person in general in life. I like to believe I'm a realist too, so I'm not a, unicorns and sunshine, rainbow kind of sunshine pump, but I feel like I'm an optimist. And this pains me. I wish there was a better story to tell, but I think this is our reality. The challenge is going to be, what are we going to do about it? In fact, it's so disheartening for me to say this stuff that I literally, as I was creating my talk and creating my slides, I was going well, now I'm going to start hitting them with all the awesome stuff that's happening and talk about all the economic development and entrepreneurship organizations that are focused on our city, but I'm actually not going to do that. Or all the great new modern companies that have been launched here, or some that have had exits and sold for a ton of money. I'm not going to show you those either. I think, quite honestly, it feels to me like we give ourselves lots of pats on the back, which I'm okay with that. I think sometimes that's necessary. It's not a bad thing. And sometimes actually call for that positive reinforcement and to celebrate our wins. But some circumstances don't call for a pat on the back. They call for a swift slap upside the head. And I feel like Amy and others that have come to town who've shared this information with us are slapping us upside the head. And the question is, are we going to wake up to this reality and do something about it? So we need to end that sleep we're in. We need to fully realize our situation, and we need to take aggressive action to change our future. And my intent is not to curb enthusiasm. I feel like I'm coming to this really super positive, optimistic group of creative people. And I joked with Madison, I'm going to take a slightly different tilt to this. Patrick spoke last month. He was talking about all the great things, which he should, about Birmingham. I'm sitting there in the audience thinking, man, I'm going to take a completely different approach on this. So I'm not here to curb your enthusiasm or to make your pride in our city shrink. Just the opposite. Instead, I hope I'm going to leverage that enthusiasm and that pride in our city to ignite some action that drives changes that allow us to live up to our potential. I think a lot of what ails Birmingham is we don't live up to our potential. So 10, 15, 25 years from now, when the data and the facts tell a completely different story and we've turned things around, I hope the young creative professionals, many of which are represented in this room today, are the ones that drove that change, that created opportunity for everyone in our community to prosper. And honestly, I don't come here pretending to know the answer. I wish I did. This is still so fresh on my mind. Amy was here in late May. I went on a family vacation, and it literally was on my mind the whole time I was traveling. I'm still probably in the sick to my stomach stage of this process versus here's the solution. But I do know this, there is no easy solution. It's going to take us years, and unfortunately it's going to take us decades probably to change this in a meaningful way. That's why I like Angela Duckworth's book on grit so much, or if you're not up for a full book, watch her 15-minute TED Talk. But she talks about the people who are really successful in life, or in this case, an entity like the metro area of Birmingham that's successful. It's doing the same thing over and over year after year because you know you've got a bigger goal in mind and you're willing to put in the hard work. And so we've got to do that. It is going to take years and years for us, and it's going to be a multifaceted effort. And anybody who says they know the answer to fix this is fooling themselves. They don't. This is going to take a lot of different things for it to happen. But I know for one thing, it's going to require new thinking. It's going to require young blood. The same people who got us into this situation aren't going to get us out of it. It's going to require us to end the status quo. We have to end our small, siloed, territorial thinking. And we have to end the sleep we're in so we don't wake up one day and it's too late. But having said that, since I'm talking to a group of creatives, we're going to take a shot at using some of that creativity to uncover at least a few ideas to get the wheels turning. But I'm going to do that in just a minute. But before I do that, I'm going to share a few examples of some innovative, courageous people trying to address what ails us in Birmingham. And these are some relatively small-scale things, and some are pretty big. And hopefully this will kind of get your mind working on the kinds of things you as an individual can do or as a group can do. People and initiatives like this, Mayor Woodfin's Birmingham Promise Initiative. Anybody familiar with that? Saw the announcement of it? Yeah, so there's more than 45% of our students in the Birmingham City Schools are actually living in poverty. Only 50% of the kids in the Birmingham City Schools are actually going to go on to secondary institutions. And Birmingham is home to more than 26,000 young people looking for work. So Birmingham Promise is a public-private partnership designed to transform the future of Birmingham's workforce. It's really, the easiest way to remember this is Birmingham Promise is about apprenticeships. It's to get these kids into real-life situations that show them career opportunities in some of those traded industries I was talking about before. And so Birmingham Promise is really pioneering this. They already this summer, I'm not sure of the number, I think it's 20-ish or so kids were placed with companies like Alabama Power, Altech, Big Communications, Brassfield and Gorey, Encompass Health, Mayer Electric, Pack Health, Shipt, Theranest, and many others that they're already working in real life situations to hopefully change their trajectory and their career path. Okay, as mentioned earlier, we're also one of the most fragmented areas, right? So the Community Foundation, a couple of years ago, hopefully some of you guys heard about our work on this, but there was a big effort around regional cooperation. The first point was to actually educate people on it, the fact that there are 35 municipalities, comparing fragmented metro areas to cooperative metro areas to see what the difference is. So here's what the data told us, that fragmented metros, when you looked at a grouping of those fragmented metros, which Birmingham was included in that, our growth rate from 2000 to 2016, that first 17 years of our century, was anywhere from negative 12%, which is shrinking, to 5% growth. If you had a fragmented, what's considered fragmented, then it was negative 12 to positive 5. If you looked at the cooperative metros, the growth was 20 to 50% over that same 17-year period. And so if Birmingham had just been the worst in the cooperative category, if we had been 20% over that 17 years, it would have created 103,000 new jobs. Think about how that would have changed our entire city, 103,000 new jobs. We dug in really deep when we got into the data. The 4 cities we chose were Louisville, Charlotte, Pittsburgh, and Denver. Those cities are not perfect. I've been to all of them. They're not perfect either, but they definitely are taking innovative approaches to cooperation. So we started poking around the edges to figure out what they were doing. We got a bunch of our mayors together. We actually proudly hosted the first meeting at DAXCO's offices one day right after Randall Woodfin got elected, which was pretty cool. And it was the first time these mayors had come together to talk about some of this regional cooperation data that we were sharing with them. A year or so later, we had 20, which represented most but not quite all of the major municipalities in the Jefferson County, signed a no poaching agreement, which is a lot of these cooperative cities, I know Denver does this, which basically means if I'm a company in Homewood, the city of Birmingham is not going to give tax incentives to steal those jobs from Homewood and place them in Birmingham, or somebody in Hoover is not going to steal those jobs from Birmingham to get them in Hoover. That creates 0 net new jobs. It's not good for Metro Birmingham. It may be good for the tax base in that suburb or the city. It's not good for the metro area. And one thing we have to realize, and these speakers have all said the same thing, if you don't have a thriving city center, you'll never have thriving suburbs. And the reverse is true. It's the whole area. The region is what's important, not one municipality. So we now have a no poaching agreement. This is a first step. The mayors are discussing other things. I mean, I'm not a political expert by any stretch, and I've only lived in Birmingham for 17 years. This felt like a pretty dramatic step to me, that they're actually getting in the same room, agreeing to things that actually matter, and they've got a list of other things that they're going to approach too. So I'm pretty excited about that. And then we had Burning Glass Technologies, a group focused on labor trends, coming to do a study on, which is now called Building It Together. It's resulted in good ideas around how we align education and jobs in our metro area, and initiatives are already being pursued underneath that research. And then a couple quick examples of private sector stepping up. First is an initiative called Birmingham Bound. Real quick story, there's a guy named Chris Moody. Some of you went to Slostech last year probably. Chris sold his company to Twitter. He now works at a VC firm, venture capital firm called the Foundry Group. He just happens to be an Auburn grad, and he came back to Birmingham to speak at Slostech last year, which is happening next week. His visit surprised him. He was pleasantly surprised what he saw in Birmingham and the energy that was here. It led him and others locally to create an idea where they brought venture-backed companies from some of these tech hubs like San Francisco and Boston and Colorado to come to Birmingham with the intent of opening secondary or expansion offices here. And then companies like Shipt in Alabama stepped up and paid for the travel and made the events possible. Joanne, who's over there by the garage doors, and Brittany at Shipt organized the events with the help from a lot of people in the tech community. And already, just since October of last year, they've hosted 8 trips, 18 companies have come, 8 venture capital firms, many of those I think were from New York, totaling 38 individuals have visited Birmingham, treated like rock stars when they come here. And then to date, 8 companies have already committed to building a Birmingham presence. And those people are already have already hired local talent, And they have additional jobs posted, and the expectation is they're going to grow those jobs over the coming months and years. So that's pretty exciting. This is a great example for all of us of people not waiting for the government to do something, not waiting for a nonprofit to come up with some idea, but instead it's a demonstration of the bias for action, seeing an opportunity, taking advantage of that opportunity, making things happen quickly and efficiently. There's no telling how long this would have taken had it gotten wrapped up in government, right? And so we need to be willing to do things that we can move really fast and make things happen. Another example like that, there's a group of entrepreneurs and innovators led by Liz Farrow, taking note from cities like Detroit that are dealing with blight. You guys familiar with blight? Blight is oftentimes houses that are abandoned because they're under tax liens and they just get abandoned over years and they get to a point where they're not repairable. All kinds of bad stuff happens there. They're not safe. There's violence, there's drugs, there's all kinds of stuff happens. And then just on top of that, if you could imagine these pictures walking by those kinds of houses every day on your way to the bus or every day on your way to school, it affects your psyche, it affects your, the way you perceive the value of your community and neighborhood. And so Liz and her group created an organization called Blight Free Birmingham, which is a for-profit group focused on removing the abandoned homes, raising those homes, tearing them down, turning them into green spaces. So you remove these eyesores and danger spots. And the idea, this happened in Detroit, of kind of refurbishing these city centers where a lot of decay has happened. And it was interesting, in talking with Liz about this, she said, I'm simply trying to spark something. And a lot of the people I talked to, even when I was talking to Josh Carpenter in the mayor's office, which was now, I think, I didn't mean to bash the government so much, but when I was talking to Josh, you know, it's the same thing, what Josh is doing and what he's doing in conjunction with Mayor Woodfin. They just want to spark something. It's the Birmingham Promise is not going to fix everything that ails us around education, but hopefully it's going to spark something. And I think that's a common thread, you know, and they're using their time, resources, and influence to make it happen. So one more thing before we do a quick exercise is who here would like to ride the bus to work today? Okay, that's what I thought. Almost, if you didn't look around, almost nobody raised their hand. And that used to be my thinking when people would ask me about buses. So my wife and I lived in Chicago. I've traveled a ton to big cities. I love public transportation. As soon as we moved to Atlanta, you would drive across the street to go to the grocery store. You got in your car, and you just have this mentality, well, we're a car culture. And that's what I would always say, like, why do we worry about this transit stuff? It's so stupid. Nobody wants to ride a bus or light rail. Well, you know what? It's not always about us. It's not always about me. And so one thing that, and this is just an example around transit, I think this happens in a lot of situations as I've tried to educate myself around this, is that you start to think about things through your own lens instead of through the lens of the people who need that mass transit. The people who need the transit, my guess is if I ask that same question, almost everybody in here owns a car. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you own multiple cars. But most people here probably own cars and drove here to get here today. Well, that's not the case with everybody. There's a lot of people who can't get a job or can't keep a job because they don't have a car, don't have access to a car. So I think as we think about some of these issues that are affecting our city, we need to think about it through the eyes of everybody in the city and truly be inclusive and not think about whether Dave Gray wants to ride a bus is inconsequential to whether or not we ought to solve this transit issue. And there's some really cool stuff going on. One thing I was asked not to talk about today, so I'm not going to because we don't want to pre-announce it, it's still being worked on. But there's some creative things happening in our city about how we solve this transit. It's all about access. It's one of the things, there's a group in Cleveland really working on this. If you look at these maps of where jobs are versus where the people who need those jobs are, I mean, it can be 17 miles, and for us, that's easy. You jump in your car, you listen to a podcast, and you get there. But if there's not a rail line, there's not a bus line to get there, it means you can't take the job. And so we need to fix that. Again, just like the suburb of the city center thing goes, if we don't solve all of these people who are unemployed or underemployed, if we don't pull them back up, the city of Birmingham will not be pulled up. We're not going to fix that 0.24% job growth just by doing it for the people in the suburbs or just doing it with white-collar jobs that are already existing here. We need to be doing training, and we need to have access to those things. So an example of that in Cleveland is they have this thing called the Paradox Prize. They raised $1 million, and their little tagline is like, no car, no job, no job, no car. It's this whole chicken and the egg thing, is you kind of have to have one to get the other. And so they put up $1 million in prize money for people who will come up with innovative prototypes and ideas to solve this. I think they do it in like $20,000 or $100,000 kind of grants. It's not the full $1 million. And so they're just trying to leverage saying, you know what, this can't be a government thing only. There's somebody in our city that's smart and is going to figure this out. And so we're trying some of that here as well. Okay, so we're going to do leveraging those examples, we're going to do a quick exercise, and we're going to try to do this fast. I don't know how we're doing on time. We're awesome on time. Okay, so everybody stand up really quick. We're going to do this like real fast. Okay, so I'd like you to do this. You just self-forming. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. It can be anywhere from 2 to 5 people. It's up to you how you combine. It could be with strangers, which is good. You'll meet somebody new. Or it could be some of your best friends so they can hold you accountable. But split up, and this is what I want you to do. Normally you would take an hour to do a proper brainstorming, but Madison would not give me an hour. She gave me 2 minutes. So there's sheets of papers and pens. Somebody be a scribe in your group. And all I want you to do is write down as many ideas as you can when I say go on what are things you think we could do to dramatically improve Birmingham. Really simple. Just whatever hits your mind, just start putting it on paper and blurt it out. Okay, go. That's good enough. Everybody, go ahead and stop. We're gonna do step 2 really quick. So I see the people near me anyway have come up with several ideas already. So that's a good start. So the idea is just kind of get the muscle working. Okay, so step 2 is, in this case, I want each person to fill out their own sheet. And we've got people passing around sheets. There is a kind of a question on each side. You can choose which side of the paper you want to fill out. And although I was only given 1 word, the word end, I'm going to give you guys 3 words because that's how gracious I am. You get 3 words. You have a choice. If you were the CEO of Metro Birmingham, which obviously that role does not yet exist, but if you were the CEO of Metro Birmingham, in 3 words or less, what would represent your platform? What would be your number 1 priority in your administration? Or if you want to, you flip the page over, and in 3 words or less, represent the action you personally are going to take in the next 60 days. It could be that you're going to start listening to these facts. It could be that you vote if you don't already vote, that you write letters to your mayor or representatives. It could be that you move to a new municipality and unseat the existing government and run for office. It could be whatever those things are. It could be that you hire somebody who doesn't have a 4-year college degree into your company. There's all kinds of things. What is the thing you would do, okay? Does that make sense? So you have your choice. Write big. Okay, go. Okay, literally, it's only 3 words, so you only get to say those 3 words. What are your 3 words, Joel?
Love your neighbor.
He said, love your neighbor. Okay, hold up, Joel. Stay up here. Okay, there you go.
Makes.
I don't think we're on. Okay, go ahead. Tell me.
Make soccer affordable.
Make soccer affordable?
Yeah.
Why is soccer not affordable?
No.
Is that a real issue?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. We're good. Okay. Okay. So for those 2 guys for coming up here, one thing I would recommend is if you had a good list on your brainstorming and or you had a good answer to the last question, take a picture of it and post it and link to the Creative Mornings links or the Creative Morning hashtag. And let's see if we can get a conversation started after this. But I also got these 2 guys. There is a Cookie Fix, which is right around the corner, and a Track Shack gift card in each of these, which coincidentally happens to be where my daughter and son both work. So, okay. Yeah. We'll talk. That's not what I would have expected the soccer one. I love the love your neighbor. We've actually been talking about that in the leadership group I'm in. That goes directly back in my mind to empathy. Everybody in Birmingham Metro is our neighbor, so we should be thinking that way. It's not just people in our little town. Okay, so thanks to Madison and Ari and the Creative Mornings team for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts with you guys today. Thanks to all the sponsors, and most importantly, and I mean this honestly, I thank you guys for actually coming here even after you heard who the speaker was going to be. Creative Mornings says they aim to bring together people who are driven by passion and purpose, confident that they will inspire one another and inspire change in neighborhoods and cities around the world. I think that's exactly what I was hoping to do today. I realize it wasn't the most cheerful message, but I believe we've got to face these brutal facts. I believe Birmingham is worth fighting for, and if we're going to live up to the potential and we're going to paint a different picture of our future, we must end our old way of doing things. We must move forward in a much more aggressive, creative way. And I believe it's the people like you in this room that are going to make the difference. So let's be bold and end the status quo. Thank you.